わった空手はオナガの T よ。
わった空手はオナガの T よ。伊達にゃ鍛えぬ T 字君。つけば放ちる命をかけて、水も漏らさぬこのアーティファ。
次蹴り天心日々繰り返し、
次蹴り天心日々繰り返し、可愛いあの子に会えるけど。
Thanks, Dan Sensei, for coming onto the podcast.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
For people who might not know who you are, could you maybe give us a background of your training and who you train with? And
Sure. So my name is Daniel Kogan. I'm the chief instructor of the Shinjinbukan dojo in Seattle, Washington. It's actually technically in Sammamish, just outside of Seattle, Washington. I'm a student of Onaga Yoshimitsu, and I guess style is shorin-ryu. Been training with Onaga Sensei for close to 30 years now, and I've been training in karate specifically for about 40 years.
And what did you initially start in? What was the initial style you started in?
So I started in basically a community center just where they offered sports karate for kids up in Vancouver. So I grew up in Vancouver, Canada. And in one of the suburbs there, local community center, we just had sports karate. Used the name Butokukan, but it wasn't a particular style. I think it was more than anything just sort of a variant of Shotokan and a few other things, and it was mostly sports oriented, which was okay for kids.
And then how did you get involved? Did you do sport karate for quite a while, or did you?
I did sports karate from about the age of 9 till finishing high school. And then I'm originally from South America, so I was born in Chile, grew up in Canada. And after high school, I went down to Argentina just so I could spend some time living in South America. In Argentina, there's just a lot of Okinawan karate, as I'm sure you know. And so that's where I met some people that were doing shorin, and that was my introduction to Okinawan karate, and that was in 86. And then sort of went back and forth a few times. Eventually in 88, I was down in Argentina, and just happened by coincidence, a friend of mine offered me to come by his dojo because his teacher from Okinawa was visiting, and that was Onaga Yoshimitsu, and it was Miguel Ramos who invited me to come visit. And so I met Onaga Sensei in Buenos Aires, actually, rather than in Okinawa, I guess, where most people meet him. So I met Sensei in Argentina, and then that same, well, I guess the following year, so that was 88, I believe. By 89, I moved to Okinawa, I moved to Japan in 89. I had a letter of introduction from people in South America so that Onaga Sensei would remember who I was, and then I spent a few days trying to talk my way into the dojo, and eventually he said yes.
What was the variant of Okinawan shorin-ryu that you were doing in South America?
So the people I trained with, I trained with a gentleman who passed away several years ago. His name was Jorge Brickman Sensei. And Brickman Sensei was a student of Shidokan, both directly from Okinawa as well as in Argentina, and then eventually he moved out of that organization into the Kenshinkan organization. So his karate was mostly Shidokan karate. That's where his background was, and a lot of the people today that sort of our generation of karate teachers, both in Argentina and sort of around the world now, have direct ties to Brickman Sensei. So people from the Kyudokan and some of the Ryu people down in Argentina now, and other shorin-ryu schools, they were all, at that time, we were all training with Brickman in Buenos Aires.
What was the training like in South America for you?
It was tough. It was much harder than anything I'd experienced up until that point in North America. In North America, it was much more casual and a fair bit more sports oriented. when I went to South America, they were still heavily into sports or heavily into competition, let's put it that way. Not so much sport. I mean, it was pretty rough and tumble, bang 'em up kind of hitting, but it was still competitive. But the training was hard. Close the windows, close the doors. It was a sweat bucket for 2 or 3 hours at a time. But it was great. I mean, I was 17, 18, 19 years old at that time when I was traveling back and forth. And so, it was good fun, and the camaraderie was great. There was a lot of people that I still relate to from back then that I see all the time. So it was good. It was a good transition point from what I was doing to something a little bit more traditional, and then eventually it sort of gave me a stepping stone to go to Okinawa.
How did the training compare to other shorin schools that you'd seen in Okinawa and South America? Were they very similar, or?
They were different. So it was interesting because for me it was a transition from sort of a North American sports karate to Okinawan karate in Argentina to then the Onaga dojo in Okinawa, right? And so that was actually a pretty gradual transition in the sense that it went much harder physical training and much more technical when I got to South America. And then that went sort of to the extreme when I got to Okinawa, right? So it was kind of a transition of the way people were thinking about their karate, the way people do their training and apply their technique was certainly one step above when I got to South America, and then it was many steps above when I got to Okinawa, as you know.
Yeah. So let's talk about the early years at the Shinjinbukan when Onaga Sensei opened the dojo. It was about the same time that you came to live in Okinawa?
Yeah, so I was there, I believe Sensei's dojo was open not quite a year, maybe just the first year anniversary. Around that time is when I went to Okinawa. So I had met Sensei, I don't remember the exact dates anymore, probably I'm going to say 6 to 8 months prior to that when I was in Argentina. I went back to Canada, finished a semester of university, went to Tokyo, and then eventually went to Okinawa. So it took me a little while to get to Okinawa. So it's probably roughly 6 to 10 months, I'm going to say. And so Sensei's dojo had been open for just a year. So he had left the Kyudokan a few years, I think maybe 2 years prior to that. I'm not exactly sure. And then he was on his own teaching just a handful of people, his own children and 1 or 2 others. And then eventually he opened the Shinjinbukan, which at the time was not called the Shinjinbukan. At the time was called the Onaga Karate Dojo. And so he opened the Onaga Karate Dojo, I'm going to say 88, which was the year that I met him in Argentina. So I was in Okinawa in 89. And the training there was, that was just something I'd never seen before, right? So I was 20-ish years old and we were training easily 6-hour classes. So we'd start at 6 or 7 p.m. in the evening and we'd train to midnight, 1 in the morning, full summer heat, windows closed, lights off, just to the point where you're going to pass out. But you've been there, you've seen that, so.
I'm feeling a little bit nauseous right now.
So that was the way it was for the first couple of years that I went back and forth to Okinawa. And it was, in hindsight, I think it was mostly Sensei's way of trying to weed people out. Like he was not interested in people that were just going to come for a little bit and leave. So if you're able to stick through it and, gaman, as they say, then he was interested in spending time with you. And if you're going to sort of take the easy road and bow out, then the sooner the better.
What did the training consist of back in the early days?
So we spent a lot of time doing just the basics. I still do, right? But we spent a lot of time doing tsukikeri, tenshin, and makiwara, and a lot of that combined. So doing tenshin in front of the makiwara, doing, tsukikeri in front of the makiwara, a lot of tension. And then some paired techniques, not that much. And then a lot of kata, primarily for me more than the others, because Sensei always had the attitude that you're going home someday, you got to learn your kata because that's the way you're going to be able to remember and how to put all this together. And then we did a lot of early days sort of kakie and yurikumi, but it took a while to get to that simply because the technical level, not just myself, but others in the dojo, right? When Sensei started his dojo, he only had a handful of people that knew what they were doing. And so it took a couple of years to generate a generation of students that could actually do kakie and yurikumi in a way that we could spend time doing it.
By the time I started at the dojo, the the amount of kata that we did was really kind of minimal. Is there a reason, do you have a theory on why Sensei stopped, didn't do as much kata as he did in the beginning, or?
Yeah, some of this is speculation, so take it with a grain of salt. Some of it is factual because I've had these conversations with Sensei, but just sort of maybe as a little anecdote, several years ago, I'm going to say 10, 12 years ago, when Sensei was here in North America teaching my dojo, we weren't doing any kata at that time in the dojo with my students, with Sensei. I mean, I spend a lot of time doing kata. And I just, asked Sensei at that point, what's going on? Why are we not doing the kata? And Sensei turned to me and he said, well, that's your job. And so from his perspective, it's not that it's not important. It's he spent 10, 15 years drilling that stuff into me. And then that was not what he wanted to spend his time teaching my guys when he was here. When he was here, he wanted to teach them the things that I couldn't teach them, right? Basically his tea and the way he thinks and the way we do kakie and things that were at a much higher level that he felt needed his instruction as opposed to my instruction. And so he was very clear with me at one point where it's like, yeah, kata is important, but you do that for them. I got to a level where I should be able to do that. In the dojo in Okinawa, that may have been the case sort of when you and I were training together at the Onaga dojo, but I think it's changed now, and this is more speculation. I think at this point, Sensei is not really teaching the guys that are there so much to be instructors, and he's teaching them more to be effective, Tijigai, effective fighters. And the folks in the dojo in Okinawa today really, although they spend some time doing kata, that's not really what they focus on. They spend most of their time doing Tenshin, most of their time doing kakie, some time doing makiwara, because the situation right now in the dojo, they don't have the sort of standard makiwara, so they don't spend as much time. But I think it was sort of a point in time. It depends on who you were, what you were looking for, what he thought you could do. And so I know when you and John Hallberg and others came to the dojo, Sensei's attitude was perhaps he wasn't interested or felt you weren't interested in his kata because you had your Goju-ryu kata. And so he was much more interested in working on the things that are either common across styles or uniquely his, and wanted to make sure you guys learn that. And so at the beginning, I don't think he cared to teach you guys kata, and I don't think he thought you guys were looking for that. Yeah,
he taught me a few kata that he felt were complementary, but even in the class, because we all did the class together, there wasn't a lot of kata, maybe a few times.
Yeah.
So
Sensei would always say, sorry to interrupt, Sensei would always say that for him, kata is really one of two ways you can learn tea, right? And so he doesn't feel that it's essential if you're sitting with your instructor. If you're with Sensei all the time, you don't need kata, he needs kata, because kata for him is a syllabus of ideas where he'll pick and choose things from to work during class. So if he was teaching you to become an instructor, he would spend quite a bit more time worrying about your kata, because that was sort of making sure you had that foundational background. If he's teaching you to learn to do kakie and irikumi and to learn how to fight, it's interesting, but it's not essential. It's sort of his idea that you can learn karate, you can learn tea without actually doing the kata. It's difficult to teach it because you sort of run out of ideas if you don't have the kata.
Yeah, this is probably a point that I think the majority of dojos all across the world would probably not understand, that how kata is sort of not the most important thing in the dojo. It's important, but not.
Yeah,
the
I
only
think
thing.
the way we think about it in our dojo is it's an important tool, but it's not the point, right? It's not the point of karate to learn kata. It is one of many tools, and it's a really useful tool, but it's also a really sort of fragile tool, right? If you get it wrong, if you haven't drilled the katas into you in a way that is natural for you, you're going to just start compounding errors throughout all your karate, right? So it's a double-edged sword, no pun intended, right? The idea is if you have the kata and you've got them polished to a good point, that's a really good tool. If you're just sort of walking through them like a dance, it's actually going to cause a lot more damage to your karate. And so Sensei would always say, kata is not the point of karate. Kata is just the shape, the form. It's literally kata, right? The Japanese word for shape. So he says, this is the shape of karate. It's not the point of karate, which I think is probably a point of contention if you talk to Japanese karate practitioners who, for them, the point is the kata, right? They consider it to be the essence of karate. And for us, it's one more tool. It's as useful as makiwara. It's as useful as your chishi. It's as useful as your partner. It's not more or less important. If you get it wrong, it's going to damage your karate.
So people might not understand like what we're actually doing in classes for 6 or 7 hours at a time.
So, yeah, no, go ahead.
What would you tell people that you're doing for 3 hours or less?
So the first thing I would have to say is it's good to be doing this interview with you, simply because most people, when I tell them, we used to train 6, 7, 8 hours. When I lived in the dojo, because I lived, I guess, a total of, when I add up all the 2, 3, 4 months at a time, the year at a time, and I put it all together, I probably spent close to 3 years living in the dojo, not living in Okinawa, but living in the dojo, right? And so when I was in the dojo, I would spend between 6 to 9 hours a day training in my gi. That was what I had to do. That was the arrangement I had with Onaga Sensei. And so, sure, when you're doing that, it's not punches and push-ups all day, every day. Although there's a bunch of that too, right? But, we would do shikodachi and maigeri for 45 minutes at a time, right? To the point where your legs were wobbling and you'd be ready to fall over. So yes, we did that. But there was also just a lot of body mechanics, learning how to move, learning how to use your hips, the body mechanics that we do, the hip work that we do, the shoulder work that we do, even the wrists and so on, that just takes time, right? And so there were times where you were in the dojo hours at a time, just learning how to make a short fist so that you'd touch the makiwara and you'd close your fist in that sort of 2-3 centimeters that you have. There is no substitute for repetition when you do that, right? And so when we say we train for 7 hours or 8 hours, yeah, a lot of it was sweating and kicking and jumping, but a lot of it was just super detailed stuff. Much of it was Tenshin, learning how to move, learning how to get across the dojo floor smoothly, quickly, picking your feet up, turning, all of that kind of stuff. It's just, you can't do it if you don't do it, right? Like you just have to spend the time. So there was a lot of that. Then there was just a lot of basics, trying to drill the basics so that it came out naturally. So doing maigeri and shikodachi slowly. So it wasn't until you passed out, but it was 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour of just front kick slowly, sensei correcting, no, toes in, no, toes in, no, knee forward, no, toes, 1,000 times, 10,000 times. We don't count, so it's hard to know. But sensei would always say, don't count your techniques, measure the time, right? So people always talk about, I did 100 tsuki, or I did, 100 tsuki on the makiwara, and sensei would say, no, don't worry about that. It's always one technique, one at a time. What's the next one you do? And the next one you do has to be as good or better than the previous one. And then it's how long did you do it for? I did it for an hour, I did it for 2 hours, I did it for 3 hours, right? So I know there's a lot of sort of mystique around people that say, oh, we do 10,000 punches, or we did For us, it was always, no, we did it for 3 hours. Like, I have no idea how many we do. It was just how long you do it for, because the whole point was the next one. And Sensei would always worry that if you actually keep track of how many you're doing, you're trying to get to a goal. It's like 999, 1,000, and I'm done. And so he wanted to make sure that you're never focused on that. You're always focused on one more good one, more good one. And that was sort of the whole attitude for 6, 7, 8 hours at a time.
I have a question. I'm not exactly sure about the difference between the mainland Japanese people use the tai sabaki term, and we use a Tenshin term. Are they? I think they're related, but they're not exactly the same. What would you say the difference was between them?
Yeah, so it's a subtle Japanese language problem, right? So tai sabaki, in my estimation, the way I learned it, and when I did Aikido for several years, it's really about the rotation of the body. It's how to turn the body, tai sabaki. Whereas Tenshin, and the literal sort of word Tenshin is sort of body displacement, is the way I translate it into English. And so it's not really, although rotation is important, it's only one of many types of tension, right? So tension is the notion of how to move. Sometimes you're moving forwards and backwards, sometimes you're moving side to side, sometimes you're moving 45, sometimes you're moving up and down, sometimes you're rotating like tai sabaki. But really tension is how to get from point A to point B, and we have tons of different body mechanics depending on what you're trying to do. So when we talk about tension, Sensei would always say, karate is tsukikeri tension, right? Striking, kicking, moving, as opposed to other people that talk about karate being blocking, kicking, and punching. So for him, it's really how to move, how to get out of the way, how to move behind someone, how to move around someone, how to move forward, how to move back. And there's I think a reasonably well-known little drawing that Sensei has that's been on NHK videos and a few other things, but he's sort of drawn out a couple of fundamental ways that he thinks about how to move, both how to move in front of the makiwara and how to move in front of a person. And so those are the basic tension that we do in the Shinjinbukan.
So there's Onaga Sensei is a Okinawan karate teacher, but I know lots of Okinawan karate teachers, and their classes look very different. Is that an artifact of being from the Kyotokan, or is it from something Sensei developed, or?
Yeah, so now he asks the tough questions. The truth of the matter is that it's Sensei's karate, and at some point when you're at that level, it sort of should be one's own karate, right? There's no question that his foundation came from the Kyotokan. He spent, his whole youth as a deshi at the Kyotokan under Yuchoku Higa Sensei. So the foundational parts of our karate is that. And, I have many good friends in the Kyotokan. Hirado Baluga Sensei and I are good friends, and I have lots of Kyotokan friends that I train with, and you can see some of the relationships. You can see sort of the early thinking of Sensei's karate is clearly Kyotokan. I mean, if there's anything that it looks something like, it's Kyotokan. And yet, it's certainly evolved. So when I first met Onaga Sensei, as we talked earlier, he'd only been out of the Kyotokan for a couple of years. Much of what I first learned those first couple of years in Okinawa, when I used to go for the summers, looks a lot more like what my friends today do in the Kyotokan. Over the years, some of those things Sensei dropped, some of those things Sensei developed and evolved, and some things Sensei just presented to me as saying, here, try this. And that's the part that is a little bit more difficult, where it's hard to know, is this something that Sensei had previously learned and it was now time to share? Or is this something that Sensei was able to sort of figure out after 30, 40 years of playing with his shorin-ryu? Sensei will always say that his karate comes from him, and so that's sort of where the conversation ends usually with Sensei. But he would say the same thing about his sensei, right? When he talks about Yuchoku Sensei, he would always say, you would never ask Yuchoku where Yuchoku learned something. Yuchoku Dai Sensei would teach what he wanted to teach you. This is secondhand. I never had the pleasure of training with Yuchoku Sensei, but from everyone that I know, Yuchoku Sensei would teach you what he had, and that was it. You didn't say, hey, where did you learn this? And Onaga Sensei in some ways is a lot like that, where some things are clearly from the Kyudokan just because you can see where they come from, and some things are not, and you can see how they evolved, and some things are him. And I don't know where those come from, and sometimes I ask, and sometimes I get an answer that I'd like to share, and sometimes I get answers that probably aren't appropriate to share.
I sometimes I can see like a Tenshin in other systems and Goju, of course, but it's really sort of basic and sort of very linear and square. With Onaga Sensei's, it's a lot of, I don't know, he sort of more tied things together and sort of, it's more improvisational. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Is that something that he sort of added, or do you think he did develop that, or?
That I actually can't answer, right? In some ways, you have an advantage over me in that you've seen more Okinawan dojos than I have. When I spend my time in Okinawa, it was rare that I would ever get to go to another dojo because Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's the usual karate training nights. Onaga Sensei would hold 6-hour classes, and the only reason I was in Okinawa was to train, so I wouldn't miss those classes. So I haven't actually seen Okinawan dojos training that often. I have. I mean, I've gone to others, but typically I know what Sensei teaches. I don't know what other people teach, but the impression that I get is that the reason our Tenshin is as fluid and as sort of improvisational, as you put it, is because we train at doing kakie and irikumi, right? So kihon, we learn it in straight lines, just like everybody else. And so when I first arrived at the Shinjinbukan or the Onaga dojo at the time, we would do Tenshin up and down the floor, right? Straight up and down, do it in shikodachi, do it in jigotai, do it in nekoashidachi. And so it was just forward and back, zenkutsudachi. But after you've drilled, and this is what I was talking about earlier, once you've drilled all that into you so it's correct and natural, then we would do it with partners. And from that point on, it really is much more sort of like an improv where the body mechanics just flow and we just do it. And then Sensei would watch us do it and correct, right? Like as you're working with a partner, he would say, no, stop. This is a mistake. You're going to get hurt here. You're going to get taken out there. Your legs are not underneath you or whatever, right? But that takes years and years. Maybe for the viewers who don't know your time at the Shinjinbukan, I remember for Naga Sensei's 70th birthday, that was 10 plus years ago, when we were all in the dojo and we spent one evening, yourself and John Hallberg and a bunch of us doing, a long night session of kakie and irikumi. It was, I don't know, maybe 15 of us, all senior guys training with Sensei. And we did it for a couple of hours that night. And I remember seeing Sensei sitting, watching us, and he had a big smirk on his face. And I turned to him and I asked, like, what are you laughing about? And I thought he was going to point out either your mistakes or my mistakes or whatever we were doing wrong. And what he said to me was, now I know it takes 20 years, because that was the 20th anniversary of his dojo, right? He says, now I know it takes 20 years to produce students that can do this, right? We had gotten to that point where our irikumi and kakie was just sort of free and loose and improvisational, as you put it. And we weren't doing sort of rigid lines anymore, right? And that was a big sort of eye-opening, I think, both for Sensei, myself, and everybody that was in the room that day. So I think you were there to share that with us.
Just a little side note, for people who use the terms a little bit differently, do you have like a definition for irikumi and kakie?
So kakie, we refer to in sort of the literal sense of hooking hands. So anything that is hooking, when we connect the two hands to, people come together, they connect hands, and then we do our technique. Regardless of what the technique is, if the hands are hooked, we refer to that as kakie. Irikumi is a variant on kakie, and irikumi when we talk about it, literally means sort of to penetrate or to get inside. And so that is a type of kake technique that is when you're in, as in yo, inside, outside. When you're in, that is when we talk about irikumi. And with kake, when I was younger, Sensei would always say, when you do kake, people get hurt. When you do irikumi, people die, right? So the idea being that if you're punching someone on the back and the outside and sort of the turtle shell, hard part of the body, it's good for sports karate. But the minute you get inside the body, that's irikumi, and that's where real fighting happens, and that's where things get dangerous. Is that the way you interpret those two terms? Or?
Oh yeah. But I know I watch a lot of other karate schools that use those terms, but they don't use them in the same way that we do. So I wanted to make sure that people had a proper image of what we were talking about. I would like to. Another thing that I was always mystified by is when I first started at the dojo, I tell people that Onaga Sensei taught me front kicks for 6 weeks, and like we're talking 15 hours a week of front kicks for 6 weeks, and they're like,
did you get it?
I hope so.
Sensei's still correcting mine, so it's okay.
But people ask me like, what could you possibly learn for 6 weeks on one technique? And I'm like, you'd have to sort of be there, but the level of detail is just unbelievable.
Yeah, so absolutely. I think that is absolutely sort of quintessential Onaga Dojo, right? Is one of my students always talks about how thinly Sensei slices that apple, right? Sensei talks about you have an apple, the important part of the apple is the seeds inside, because from those seeds you can germinate them and you produce more students and ideas and so on. And so it's always about getting to that core, and then suddenly you realize, well, wow, we've now sliced that apple so thinly that, and I think that's sort of what you're getting at. But I have a similar story about training in dojo and how people don't quite understand the level of detail and deliberateness. I won't mention names because a very prominent Western karate teacher who was spending time in Okinawa when I was living in the dojo, and one evening he asked me, hey, how was class? And I said, well, it was great. We spent about 3 hours doing, tsuki. And he was like, what? I was like, yeah, that's what we do. And he's like, yeah, he says these Okinawans, they don't believe that Westerners will ever learn karate. We don't need to come here to learn to do tsuki. And I was like, no, it was great. It was like, for me, the level of detail and sort of having Sensei spend one-on-one time with me for hours on end. I mean, that's why I went to Okinawa, right? Whereas others go to Okinawa and, we worked out really hard tonight. That was great. And I was like, no, we just spent all night doing one thing. Like your experience with the front kicks, I've had that class, I don't know how many thousand times, like front kicks all night. Here we go, right?
And Sensei also, he seems to, a lot of times when we go to the dojo, it would be only like 1 or 2 people, or if you're there by yourself, he would actually sort of give you a custom lesson on like things that he thought you might be good at or be interested in. Yeah.
I mean, the classes are typically small. There's just not that many people that are willing to put up with what you and I put up with, right? It's those are long nights, and nowadays it's different since he's in his 80s and he's not teaching such long classes and so on. But back in the day when Sensei was our age now, right? I met Sensei when he was 50, right? So when Sensei was my age, classes were brutal and they were long, and the average person couldn't be bothered. That's not what they wanted. And Sensei would always say to me, most people want to know karate, very few people want to learn karate. And that was sort of an important difference, right? Like the guys that would come to the dojo and bail, like, it's not for me. So if you were there and you were putting up with it, as it were, absolutely. Sensei was highly motivated and invested in making sure that you got something out of it, right? It wasn't what he planned to teach. It was like, oh, James is here tonight. James needs to work on this, or he's been, asking about this other thing that, the other students weren't quite ready for, but now that it's just James, let me share, right? And that is very typical with Onaga Sensei. You know, in the dojo, there's usually 2 or 3 people on a busy night. And so you get one-on-one attention. Sometimes that's the best thing in the world. Sometimes you wish it was otherwise, but you're the one there, and so you get all his attention.
I don't want to. I want to know if you have a theory or an opinion about, like you read about karate in books, and they always talk about shorin having like a lot of hip motion, but then I watch a lot of people in shorin, and I don't see the hip motions that I read about in books. But in Onaga Sensei's karate, there's a lot of hip. Is there?
Yeah.
Do you have a theory on why like people talk like that, or?
So, yeah, it's hard to know what people write in books. You know? I think people write in books what they've heard, not what they've seen, for the most part. That said, I think the hip movement there's a long lineage of the way we do those hip movements. Yuchoku Sensei has that same hip movement. There are other people that did similar things in Okinawa, even going back to China. Not to say that that's where it comes from in the Kyudokan, because there's not a direct Chinese connection there. But even when you look at some of the Tai Chi styles, like Chen style Tai Chi, that uses a very similar hip movement to what we do. So that hip movement, there's certainly a long lineage and tradition in the martial arts, and certainly in pretty much any activity that needs to generate power, right? You think about a tennis stroke or a soccer kick or whatever it happens to be. So I think the body mechanics are well founded and understood. The lineage, I think it's complicated and technical, and so like many other things, it sort of gets dropped by the wayside, especially in a world where if you're bigger, you win, and so you don't necessarily need the hip movement until you meet someone that's even bigger than you, and oops, too late at that point. And so I think with a lot of the Westerners that were going to Okinawa, they weren't taught the hip movements, not because they were being secretive and keeping them away from them, but it was too technical and they weren't going to be here that long. And B, they didn't really need to generate that much more power when you're 6'2", 250 pounds, and you're facing an Okinawan who's 5'3", right? And so there was some practicality into, hey, this isn't what we're going to invest time in. We're going to teach you other things because you don't look like you need this. So I suspect there's some of that. I also suspect that in the time that most Westerners were in Okinawa doing 1 or 2 years of karate and going home, there's just not enough time to get that level of nuance. And then in Okinawa itself, there's just a lot of people that learned karate and weren't really at the level of instructors. They weren't Kyoshi and Hanshi level. They just happened to be the guy that remained after the Second World War, or the guy that happened to get the job working on a military base and therefore got some students. And so it's unclear that a lot of those people were necessarily sort of the elite cream of the crop of their generation. So there's just a bunch of things I think that happened there.
What's maybe something I think is kind of unique to Sensei, and I'd never heard the term before, but the T term that we've been using a lot of. Recently I've seen a lot of people using it, but not in the same sort of way that we use it. What would you say that the T is a definition of T for us?
So yeah, it's an interesting concept. So Onaga Sensei uses the term T probably differently than most, where people today talk about T as being the precursor to karate, sort of old classical karate. That's not what Onaga Sensei talks about when he says T. For him, T is sort of the pinnacle of karate. It's this idea of if you have many techniques to pick from, there's no way that you're going to be able to train 30 variants of one thing. You find the right one, you keep that for yourself. And so Sensei always says people have their own tea. This is a collection of ideas. This is the best of the best as far as I understand it, or as best as I can do it. And so when you talk about tea, Sensei would always say, his karate is Onaga no tea. This is his ideas and his way of understanding, his theories and his body mechanics. And you can take those, make them your own, and then over time, hopefully if you've been diligent in training, you will eventually end up with your own version of something, right? So he won't say this is or is not tea. What he will say is, oh, that's your tea, that's good for you. This is what I do. Let me show you what I do. And so with folks like yourselves, right, that come in from a Goju-ryu background, I'm sure you've had the experience where he won't tell you, don't do this, it's wrong. He'll say, that's Goju-ryu, this is shorin-ryu, very interesting. Let me show you something, and he'll show you a technique, and it's sort of up to you to decide whether that's going to be part of your arsenal or not, right? And so his way of thinking about tea is a little bit more, a little less concrete, right? There's no right or wrong answer. It's here's a way of thinking, here's how we understand things, here's how we train. And so when he talks about tea, it's a little bit less of style. It's not shorin-ryu or it's not goju-ryu. It's this is how you apply it. These are the body mechanics. This is the theory. It makes sense. Therefore, it's tea.
I found that's the one really good thing about training at that dojo is that it didn't matter what style you came from. He could just basically how a body moves, and he knew all of that.
Yeah, the body mechanics have to be the same unless your joints bend the other way, right?
Like he often says that you can punch any way you want in kata, but if you want to hit something, that's a different story.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm kind of interested in, well, that was one of the things that attracted me to Sensei was he has an actual sort of like a philosophical underpinning of how he thinks about things and why things are the way they are from first principles, like your body moves this way, you need to move, you breathe this way, you step this way because of these things. How did he come about that? Did he just think of it himself, or was it just?
Yeah, those are hard questions for me to answer, right? I think you would have to talk to Sensei, but I can speculate on some of them. Sensei is very, very sort of deliberate and cognizant of the fact that karate needs to evolve, that it can't just be a static thing, right? He will often make the point that we are not a preservation society. For him, it's his job to take the karate that he was given, make it as good as he can possibly make it, transmit it to the next generation as well as he possibly can, and then it's our job to take it to the next level, right? And so his whole worldview is your job, you, James, your job is to make your karate better than his, right? And there's no, well, he's sensei, so I'll never be as good as him. Like if he does his job right, you and I someday should be able to get better. And so with that, he's been very deliberate about organizing and structuring his basics, his kihon. The way that he talks about building that karate is, he always talks about kihon. In English, people say basics. Sensei always says, yeah, but basics gives the implication that it's simple because they're the basics. It's like, no, it's the foundation. It's the base, right? And so we have all these kihon that we work on, as you talked about, the breathing, the moving, the tension, the hip work, and so on. And so he's been very deliberate about organizing those in a way that he can transmit them to the next generation so that we can do something hopefully meaningful with them. The one place that is really uniquely his, though, I think, is the way he teaches breathing, which he sort of alluded to. And this, I will conjecture, complete speculation, but for those who don't know, Sensei is as avid a musician as he is Tijigaya karateka, right? And so the way that he teaches breathing, although I'm not a musician, to me just feels like I'm in music class. Like he will talk about the breathing and the pausing and the inhaling and the exhaling, and when we stop the breath and we expand the chest and we contract the chest, in ways that, although I don't play the trumpet, I've seen Sensei play the trumpet, and he talks about that the same way. So with, you know, at the danger of some speculation here, I feel as though that part of his teaching is really informed and based on his music background.
I'd like to get your opinion on it. I feel that a lot of the modern karate people are, well, being stuck in a sort of a traditional sort of mindset, but the changing of the purpose, like I don't think they view it as dangerous as it is. Like if you change your purpose from fighting and defense to like a preservation society, people don't really see the difference. But like when you go to transmit it, I think it sort of runs off the rails and becomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in some ways, Western culture in the martial arts sense has picked up some of the less desirable traits of Japanese culture, right? In that unquestioning obedience to Sensei said so. And you see that in Japan, you see that in mainland a lot, you see that in Okinawa, there's no question about it with the Japanese school system. And then Westerners have taken that, brought it overseas, and have completely detached themselves from the Japanese culture. And it's just, Sensei said so, you can't question, you must do, there's no explanation, you don't know enough yet, someday it'll come. And that sort of self-fulfilling, you will never be as good as your sensei because you're not him sort of mentality, I think is really detrimental. And then the notion of we do it like this because this is the way it's always been done is sort of part and parcel of that, right? Don't question it, just do it. Whereas Onaga Sensei's attitude has always been, if you think of it as a scientific pursuit, you have to question. Now, you have to be well educated in the basics, you have to understand the theories, you have to certainly question at the right point in time, not in the middle of class and call someone out. But the notion of, is this actually going to work for me? Sensei would always say, try it and prove it to yourself, right? He wouldn't say, go do it 1,000 times. He would say, go prove it to yourself. And so you would go and you'd sit in the corner and you'd try whatever it was that was being taught. And if it didn't work, you would always come back and question, did I misunderstand what I was shown? Or is there something not quite right here? And it was totally fair to actually ask the question. And 99.99% of the time, it's you didn't understand what was being taught, which was fine. And then it would be taught again, usually harder, faster, and more painful, but it was taught again. But, you know, it's okay and it's appropriate to question, because otherwise you end up in this thing that's a sort of preservation society of, we're doing what someone did in the past because that's the way they did it, and we're replicating the mistakes that someone did in the past, and I'm going to pass on those historic mistakes to you, good luck with them, right? And so Sensei's attitude has always been, no, our job is to move the ball forward, to try and make it better, to understand it better, and not to sort of kid yourself that you're actually doing something that someone was doing 300 years ago. Like, that's just not true, right? When people say, we have the original version of blah. Well, no, right? Like, it's almost impossible, since we don't have the original version of anything else in history. It's unlikely that we have the original version of that kata. And so in that sense, I think Japanese martial arts, where they actually do the ha, like they say such and such ryu and such ha, that in some ways gives some credence to, no, this is this person's karate, right? This is, if you imagine using Japanese nomenclature, instead of saying Onaga Ti, you would say shorin-ryu Onaga Ha. It's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. This is his way of understanding karate, right? We don't use those in nomenclature, but if you did, that would work.
Oh. So what do you think about the level of karate in general in the world? Is it improving?
It's interesting. I think it's good, and let me qualify that. I think the people that are doing karate are doing good karate. I think there's just a lot of people out there that say they're doing karate that aren't doing anything that resembles karate. And so the term karate is, I think, being misapplied or misused. But the reality is, in my opinion, there's more people today around the world doing something that is based on traditional karate. Now, the truth of the matter is, it's not thousands, it's maybe hundreds, maybe, right? But if you think about the days in Okinawa, where in every generation, the pre-war generation, we can count the number of people that were truly, at an instructor level, master level. There were 3 or 4 of them. We know them by name: Yagi, Chojun, Oichi, and so on. But there were maybe sort of just below them, the next generation of karate men, a few dozen, maybe a few hundred, if that. And now if you think about those people, that level, there is hundreds of people in the world, in South America, in North America, in Okinawa, doing that level of karate. Now, the fact that there's hundreds of thousands of people claiming they do something that is karate, that makes this conversation more complicated, because I don't consider that karate. But people that are doing traditional Okinawan karate, regardless of the ryuha, I think there's quality level stuff out there. It's hard to find. They usually don't have big signs out, and they usually don't have more than a handful of people in their dojo, but they're there.
Well, that's 50 minutes. Is there anything else that you wanted to get to, or? No,
it's your conversation. Thanks for inviting me. So I don't know if we talked a lot about Sensei. I don't know if there's anything else you want to know about me, but we're all good.
So, well, I already know the answer to this, but
I was going to say, there's probably nothing that you would want to know about me, because you and I have now known each other. I was thinking about this. You and I have known each other well over 20 years. We're both raised in Canada, and yet the only place we've ever met is in Okinawa. We keep meeting, every year or so in Okinawa for the last 20 years. I've never seen you anywhere else. But go ahead. What was your question?
So for people who are kind of interested in training with you or Naga Sensei, is there a way to go about doing that, or?
Sure. With me, so we happen to be sitting in my dojo. I have a private dojo just outside of Seattle. So if you want to find me, you can find me at okinawakaratedo.com, or you can put my Hotmail email, I guess, associated with this video, d_kogan@hotmail.com. Either of those ways, and people are welcome to reach out to me, and we can make an appointment if you want to come and visit. You can't just walk into my dojo; it's a private dojo, but otherwise, people are more than welcome to reach out. With Onaga Sensei, it's a little bit more complicated. So Sensei, it's never been easy to get into the Onaga dojo, but nowadays, Sensei's been teaching privately a lot more in Okinawa, small group of students. So if people want to train with Sensei, he's open to it, but it's not regular classes. So I think anyone that wants to travel to Okinawa and reach out to Onaga Sensei, I suspect Sensei would be keen to take people in for sort of an evening or whatever length of time you're in Okinawa. That's not the same as becoming Sensei student. I think people shouldn't be confused by that. But they can reach out either to me in my email or directly to you. I think you You could probably put people in touch with Sensei as well, but Sensei doesn't have a regular schedule these days in Okinawa, so you can't just sort of show up and train Monday, Wednesday, Fridays with him.
I guess thank you for being on the program, and I look forward to seeing you again. Yeah,
thank you for having me, and you sort of have this. Everybody I know in karate now has sort of been on your program, so it's good.
I'm trying to showcase people doing real karate that I think are decent people to showcase. So. Good.
Well, keep up the good work, and hopefully we'll get to see you either there, or maybe one day you're actually going to cross the pond and come back, and we'll meet you here.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay. Well, thanks again, James. Thank you for everything. Say hi to Sanaha Sensei for me.
Okay. No problem.
Take care.
See ya.
終わった空手はオナガの T よ
終わった空手はオナガの T よ伊達にゃ